All right, welcome everyone, and a special welcome to those of you joining us via video. Today is April 24th, 2022. Are we up and live? No? All right. Well, sorry. We're going to do this one just on video, and we'll post it out to YouTube. This week, we're going to be in Acts 24, verses 1 through 15. We're going to do two parts today. So make sure you watch the first one and watch the second one. We won't get it all in on one video. We're going to break it up, hopefully about 30 minutes long each. So this is part 1 of April 24th. A little review of where we are. Acts 23, the last 15, 20 chapters, 24 chapters, or 24 verses to be exact. There were 40 plus Jews that were plotting to kill Paul. The Roman soldiers took Paul to Caesarea. If you remember, Caesarea was kind of the center of everything. And Jerusalem was not, as far as the Romans goes. Jerusalem was still the spiritual center, but it was not the gubernatorial. It was not how the area was governed. It was governed out of Caesarea. And so Paul was taken to Caesarea to be tried by Marcus Antonius Felix, the Roman governor of Judea. Paul was held in Herod's judgment hall until the Sanhedrins were to come and make their accusations against Paul. So that's where we ended up in Acts 23. So Acts 24:1. And after 5 days, Ananias, the high priest, descended with the elders and with a certain orator named Tertullus, or Tertullus, I've heard it pronounced both ways, so we might flip-flop back and forth, who informed the governor against Paul. Now, this Ananias, if you remember, he's the same dude who said, hey, slap Paul, back a chapter or so ago in Acts 23:2, and Paul's like, what? I didn't offend anybody. How dare you have them slap me? So this Ananias is kind of a cantankerous old turkey, but in Acts 23:2. Now, the orator that they brought with them, this certain orator named Tertullus, an orator is like legal representation. Okay, so this orator is like the legal counsel for the chief priests and the leaders of the Jewish people. So, public speaker regarding the law, I would use that term. Okay. So, 24:2, and when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, see that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence. Now, he isn't talking about accusing Paul. He's actually fluffing up. He's kind of buttering up to Felix. Okay, so he's saying, hey, everything's been quiet. You've been so amazing, Felix. Very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence. If we accept it always and in all places, most noble Felix, that with all thankfulness, notwithstanding that I be further tedious unto thee, I pray thee that thou wouldest hear us of thy clemency a few words. Okay, so he's just buttering up this Felix dude. Okay, this Tertullus. He's a smooth operator. He talks about the being tedious. Now, here's a word that tedious, further tedious unto thee. We've changed that word in English lately. Tedious does not mean small or trivial. That's how we would use it. But in the true terminology of the Greek and the Aramaic and the whatever, it actually means tiresome, from continuance. Like, so I don't that I may not be further tedious unto thee doesn't mean that I'm going to be trivial. It means that I'm not going to just wear you out and be tiresome. I'm going to get to the point, so you don't have to deal with this much longer, Felix. So let me be non-tedious. Let me be to the point and not tiresome. Okay, that clemency, the word clemency there, I pray thee that thou wouldest hear us of thy clemency, a few words. Think of clemency as mercy. Okay, clemency is to spare us or to forgive us. So sorry, Felix, we're not going to make this more tiresome than it has to be, and please forgive us if we are a little bit like asking you of too much. Okay? As Tertullus continues on, for we have found this man, Paul, a pestilent fellow. Okay, pestilent is a troublesome or someone who makes a disturbance. Okay, so pestilent. We think it was more of a trivial, but no, pestilent is making a disturbance, or even to go so far as to say corrupt. So we find this man a pestilent fellow and a mover of sedition among all the Jews. That mover of sedition means to cause the people, or in this case the assembly, to rise up, to oppose the government. So we find him a pestilent fellow, so we find him corrupt, and he's trying to stir up all the people against us and against you, in essence, Felix, trying to stir up people, okay? And throughout the world, a mover of sedition of all Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. Only place that the word ringleader is used in the Bible is here. So this is a pretty big accusation. I mean, people have accused people for 4,000 years, but this is the most accusatory that you might say that anybody has been. So this Tertullus is not holding any blows. He is being very aggressively accusatory of Paul at this time. A ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. Now, the Nazarenes, they call this, it's a group accused of following the teaching of Jesus of Nazareth. Okay? That's what a Nazarene is. But they aren't saying that they're a belief. They're accusing them of being it. So it's like if you accuse somebody of being, I don't know, a dodo bird. There is such thing as a dodo bird, as my father has clearly stated over the past years. Don't be a dodo bird. But it's not like there's an actual official group of it. It's almost like an insulting thing to say that he's of the sect of the Nazarenes. It's kind of like saying, yeah, of those guys who really don't believe anything. Because there is no such thing as a sect of the Nazarenes that Jesus would declare. He's like, look, I'm preaching to all Jews. I'm not just preaching to the people of Nazareth. Okay, so this is actually another insulting thing. And this is not to be confused with, this Nazarenes is not to be confused with, I'd write it down, Judges 13:5, talking about a Nazarite. Remember, like 2 or 3 chapters ago when Paul took a vow and he was in a trance and he shaved his head and all that kind of stuff? That was a Nazarite vow. That has nothing to do with a sect of the Nazarenes. They sound very close, but those are not synonymous, and they don't go with the same group even. A Nazarite, if you remember, let's see, John the Baptist was a Nazarite, Samson was a Nazarite. I think there were 3 of them in the Bible that declared themselves, and they didn't ever shave their head. That's why Samson never shaved his head, because he was a Nazarite. Okay, that's not a Nazarene. Different. There is an official thing called a Nazarite in the Jewish law, and that's to take an oath. Anyway, so that makes, let's see. Now, where are we here in Acts 25? Let's see. Oh, yeah, in Acts 25. Where are we again? To remind ourselves of the entire map. Of course, we're over here in Israel. We're here in the small Israel, and then if we go up here, we're in Caesarea, right to the northern part. So Nazareth wasn't very far away from Caesarea. So for him to say, hey, you're of the Nazarenes, well, that's next door. And so you're just kind of a local wannabe group. Okay? Acts 24:6. Who also hath gone about, so this is Tertullus still accusing Paul, who also hath gone about to profane the temple. To profane is to treat irreverently or to not hold as sacred, to pollute. So he's accusing him of polluting the temple, whom we took and would have judged according to our law. So he's like, well, we are trying to accuse you of profaning the temple, Paul. But the chief captain Lysias came upon us and with great violence took him away out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come unto thee in other words, to come unto Felix, by examining of whom thyself mayest take knowledge of all these things whereof we accuse him. Okay, so this is Tertullus's all of his accusations. Kind of scathing. It doesn't feel like it, but they really were. Okay? 24:9. And the Jews also assented, saying that these things were so. I just think of them as little puppets over in the corner, and Tertullus looks over and says, right? And they're all like, uh-huh. Okay? So they didn't have the courage to speak in front of Felix. They sent this Tertullus guy, and they're like, yeah, he did that. Okay? Assenting means to agree or to admit as true. Okay. Let's see. 24:10. Then Paul. So now the accusing, the legal team for the prosecution has finished. Now Paul is going to defend himself. Then Paul, after that the governor had beckoned unto him to speak. So Felix obviously indicated for him to speak. Answered, for so much as I know that thou hast been of many years a judge unto this nation, I do the more cheerfully answer for myself. Because that thou mayest understand that there are yet but 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem to worship. Well, back just in Acts 21:18, that was just 12 days ago. It's taken us longer than that. Okay? But that was just 12 days ago that he came up to Jerusalem. He took that vow of silence, shaved his head, did all that other kind of stuff. And verse 12. And they neither found me in the temple disputing with any man, neither raising up the people, neither in the synagogues nor in the city. So he's just saying, I didn't cause any of that ruckus that they were talking about, or any of that division, okay? Neither can they prove the things whereof they now accuse me. But, okay, we know when we see a but, it's going to change something. So he's saying, I'm not guilty of anything, but this I confess unto thee, that after the way which they call heresy, which is only used like 2 or 3 times in Scripture, so worship I the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets. Did Paul say anything about him coming up with a new message, with him creating or forming or making or whatever we want to say, a new gospel? No, he's saying, I am simply believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets. We all know that, right? Acts 24:14. He has not been speaking any new information of his own character, or of his own mystery. Okay? So he only believed the things which are written in the law and in the prophets, and have hope toward God, which they themselves allow. So he's saying to Felix, they allow me to have this hope. They believe the same thing, this hope that I have towards God, that there shall be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and the unjust. So let's go to the timeline for just a minute. This resurrection of the dead, both of the just and of the unjust. I'll zoom in on this, so Caden, you might not have to. But here's our timeline. And we're talking about on either side of this 1,000-year kingdom, the just and the unjust. Okay? See if that gets you a little bit closer. Okay? So here's the 1,000-year kingdom of God. And here's going to be where the just resurrection, or the born again, and the unjust resurrection is going to be at the end of it. Okay? So Paul's saying, this resurrection thing, you guys believe it. Now, Did they all believe it? No, because only the Pharisees believed in the resurrection. The Sadducees didn't believe in any of it, right? They didn't believe in either. But this is all talking about, here's the focus of and then we're going to go back and just break down everything. This is Jew. We're not talking about you. I came up with that's a good one. This is about the Jews. We're not talking about us here. So from the time that we started today through the time that we end today, we're not talking about what's going to happen to you. You're not going to be born again. You're not going to come back at the first resurrection or the second resurrection. This isn't about you. Okay? So in 24:15, when Paul talks about this, he has hope towards God. They have hope towards God. This hope, we're going to come back to a little bit. We're going to really break this down. But in Acts 23:6, he also talks about this hope towards God. Okay? Discuss that in 10 minutes. But what we really want to get to in this end of this first part is the resurrection of the dead. What is this resurrection of the dead thing? Okay? We're going to break it down. We're not going to talk about the just and the unjust. That's for part 2 as the teaser for you. We're going to talk about this resurrection of the dead. Okay? To better understand the resurrection of the dead, I believe it's best to read John 11:24. If we all want to turn there, we're welcome to turn there. I'm going to turn there, and I'll put it up on the screen as well so we can follow along there. But John 11:24 we'll read the whole story. I'm gonna give you the end of the story, and then we're gonna go back and read through all of John 1 through 24. But Martha said to Jesus in John 11:24, Martha said to him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. The resurrection at the last day. This is talking about a resurrection of the dead. So something in this story caused Martha to come back and said, hey, I believe in the resurrection of the dead. So now let's go back and what was Martha referring to? Let's go back and read John 11, 1 through 24. We're just going to read through it. I'm going to put a little emphasis on the right places. Emphasis. All right. So now a certain man, do you hear that? Certain, right? We know this is a real story, a real event, not a story, not a parable. Certain man was sick, named Lazarus, even names him of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary which anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore his sisters sent unto him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. In other words, their brother Lazarus sick. When Jesus heard that, he said, This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. When he had heard, therefore, that he was sick, he abode 2 days still in the same place where he was. Not too worried about him, even though he loved him. Then after that, saith he to his disciples, Let us go into Judea again. His disciples say unto him, Master, the Jews of late sought to stone thee, and goest thou thither again? Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If any man walk in the day, he stumbleth not, because he seeth the light of this world. But if a man walk in the night, he stumbleth, because there is no light in him. These things said he, and after that he saith unto him, Our friend Lazarus sleepeth, but I go that I may awake him out of his sleep. That story is also, this sleeping is found in Acts 7:60 as well. Then said his disciples, Lord, if he sleep, he shall do well. Well, what is this sleep? Okay, this sleep is the same spiritual sleep that Daniel talks about in Daniel 12:2. It's prophesied in Daniel 12:2. I think I've got that. Nope. Don't have that up there, but in Daniel 12:2, as many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Okay? So this sleep is a common thing that they've heard about. They should understand this, but they didn't understand it. They thought he was talking about taking a snooze. Okay? So let's continue to read on in so 11:12. Then the disciples said, Lord, if he sleep, he shall do well. And howbeit, verse 13, howbeit Jesus spake of his death, but they thought that he had spoken of taking a rest in sleep. That rest in sleep, you can find, if you're taking notes, in Matthew 26:45, also Mark 14:41, where he's talking about that resting and sleeping. That's actually sleeping. That's not the death that we're talking about here. But then Jesus, to make it more clear to them, is like, okay, you guys think that I'm talking about the sleep. I'm not talking about the sleep. And in 14, he says, then Jesus said unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Okay? He wasn't just sleeping. He wasn't just resting. That Lazarus is dead. He plainly said that that he was dead for 4 days when Jesus arrived, and we read that here later in 17 and in 39. And I am glad for your sakes, Jesus says, that I was not there, to the intent ye may believe. Nevertheless, let us go unto him. Then said Thomas, which is called Didymus, this is doubting Thomas, unto his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. Then when Jesus came, he found that he had lain in the grave 4 days already. So Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. Now Bethany was nigh unto Jerusalem, about 15 furlongs off. A furlong, 220 yards for anybody keeping track. So 8 furlongs equal a mile, and they were about 15 furlongs off, so not quite 2 miles away. And many of the Jews came to Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Martha stood as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him, but Mary sat in the house. Then said Martha unto Jesus, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. But I know that even now, whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee. Jesus said unto her, thy brother shall rise again. So now we have the mindset of why was Martha talking about the resurrection? Well, her brother had been dead 4 days. And Jesus says, hey, your brother will rise again. And she says, Martha said, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Okay? So she believed in something at the last day. The resurrection of the dead. But Martha didn't understand that he was actually talking about the first resurrection that had been taught not more than 6-8 months ago, but she didn't get it. She's like, oh, well, I know. I've learned about the resurrection at the last day. And Jesus, this whole time, in that very brief sentence, was trying to convince her, no, I'm talking about being born again into everlasting life, a different resurrection. Okay? In John 11:23, Jesus saying that your brother shall rise again. Martha saying that I know that he shall rise again at the last day. This verse is not about Christ's resurrection. And it's not about the beginning of the 1,000-year resurrection. It's at the last day resurrection. Okay? Prior to Christ's death, there was only that last day. So Christ is telling him something new. And she didn't get it. And he had told it before. Martha's confession was in John 11:24. And she learned about that in John 6:40 and 44. But Martha nor the disciples understood that Jesus was telling them, hey, I've got to die. And when I die, you're going to get a new resurrection. There's going to be a second one. Okay? And we know that so we're in John 11 there, right? In John 20, verse 9, we know that they still didn't understand about this resurrection. For as of yet they knew not the scripture that he must rise again from the dead. They didn't understand that he was going to be having a resurrection. They didn't get that. Why didn't they get that? They should have known this. Now, we've talked about these verses a number of times, and this is why they're so critical. We're going to read one of them, but in 29 AD, Jesus began, so a couple years after he was preaching, he finally started teaching people, I'm going to have to die. But for the first 2 years, he didn't teach them that. Why? Because he thought, well, if they believed in him, he wouldn't actually have to die. They believe him and accept him as the Messiah. 7 years of Daniel's 70th week, or what we call the tribulation period, and then they'd have the kingdom. He wouldn't have had to have died. But things happened, and it got to the point where Jesus was like, well, these are the only options in the millions of options in that big Plinko game that could actually come to pass. And so in 29 AD, they're like in 3 different places. It says, from that time forth began Jesus to show unto his disciples that he must go into Jerusalem, suffer many things of the elders and the chief priests and scribes, and be killed and raised again the 3rd day. For the first 2 years, he didn't talk about dying. So he wouldn't have talked about another resurrection. He would have only talked about the last resurrection. Right? So that's why Martha's confused. Now that we understand that the Jewish believers and Martha believed in the resurrection of the dead, the last one, but didn't understand that there are now 2 resurrections, why do we believe that in Acts 24:15, that this resurrection of the dead, why do we believe that was now going to be the first resurrection? The one that's going to be similar to what Christ is going to go through. And that there are 2 different resurrections now of the just and the unjust. Okay? Why would we believe that? When Christ took upon himself the sin of the world at the cross, his death and blood atonement granted for the Jews the new, or now the first resurrection. Okay? That just resurrection. To rise again at the just resurrection. Because of Christ's resurrection, footnote, you don't have to, but these are just for the people at home who want to look up verses. Matthew 27:63, Mark 8:31, Luke 24:7, and John 20:17. That's when Christ was resurrected. Okay? When Christ's resurrection happened, the believing Jews will, in the same fashion, be resurrected. They'll experience the same thing, the same physical resurrection. So when Jesus said to Martha, hey, your brother will rise again, he was saying, your brother is going to do the same thing physically as what I'm going to do. He was doing it as not only an example, but the perfect example to then forgive all sin, right? Same physical resurrection as being raised or born again into everlasting life. Check out Romans 6. I think I'm supposed to be to there. Yeah. Romans 6:3. There should be light bulbs going off when we read this, because now you realize it's the exact same physical thing. This is not talking about a spiritual or representation. This is physically what's going to happen to the Jews. Romans 6:3 through 5. Know ye not that so many of us as were baptized into Jesus Christ were baptized into his death? Therefore we are buried with him by baptism into death, that like as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life. They're going to be raised from the dead in newness of life. For if we have been planted together in the likeness of his death, we shall also be in the likeness of his resurrection. Now, every church that I know of has misused this verse and talked about it with communion or talked about it with whatever else like that, and you'll have newness of life with Christ if you just take communion. Malarkey. This is talking about the Jews being raised up just like Jesus was raised up from the dead. In a death like mine, you're going to have a life like mine. Okay? So Paul was holding out this hope, what we said we're going to come back and talk about in about 10 minutes, and it's been 15. This hope towards God for the Jews in Acts 24:15. He had that hope. Oh, let's see if I can go back to that. And the hope toward God. I believe Paul is saying that there will be a resurrection of the dead, of the just and the unjust. I believe in both of them, Paul is saying. So how do we know that this is talking about two resurrections? Let's go to Revelation 20. Well, I got a lot of verses here. Let's go to Revelation 20, verse 5 and 6. Where does Scripture speak about two different resurrections? Here. Revelation 20, verse 5. But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Sounds like we now have a first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection, and on the second death hath no power. But they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. This first resurrection that it's talking about is the new one. It's the one that's going to happen first. The one that's going to happen at the beginning of the 1,000 years. We'll go over to the board and we'll make it at the next session, part 2. But this first resurrection, Christ afforded the Jewish believers because of his death and the forgiveness of sins. But the original resurrection that Martha talked about is not called the first resurrection. It's simply just called the resurrection. When she said, Lord, I know he'll come back at the resurrection on the last day, because at that time there wasn't a first and a second. There was only a resurrection. Okay? There's only that resurrection. But up until the second resurrection was taught, the original resurrection was called the resurrection at the last day. Now, after Christ's death, it is called the second resurrection, or that last one is called the unjust. Okay? And the just. So we'll get into that in great detail. But in Acts 24:15, Paul is claiming that he is on trial for the belief of both of these resurrections. Okay, we heard him even say it in Acts 23:6. But when Paul perceived that one part was the Sadducees and the other the Pharisees, he cried out in the council, "Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee and a son of a Pharisee. Of the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am called in question." He's like, this whole time you guys are putting me on trial isn't because of any of my beliefs. It's because of the fact that I believe in these two resurrections. So why was Paul tried for years? Because of this. And so from Acts 20-esque, the entire way through Acts 28, he's really defending himself from this one principle. That's why it's so important for us to understand these two different resurrections, okay? So now that we understand there are two resurrections, we will learn specific details about each, the just resurrection, or the first, and the unjust resurrection, the second, as they are taught in Acts 24:15 in part 2 of this study. Okay? Now we understand there are two resurrections. Now we're going to know some more details. All right? Any questions? No? All right. Thank you.